From the Rolls Royce of chalk to the world's most expensive marble, we explore businesses making rare art supplies and keeping ancient crafts alive. Our first stop is South Korea, where we learn how a school teacher saved an iconic chalk brand from collapsing.
It sort of like melts on the blackboard. That's the feeling. As you go, it's just like melting very, very gently, and it just writes a lot better.
Álvaro Lozano Robledo is a professor of mathematics at UConn and would only ever use Hagoromo chalk if he had his way.
Like there was some video that I made about, it was like Gollum and my precious, you know, the one ring, but it was like me, you know, just like looking at pieces of chalk that somebody left behind or something. So I started making more and more videos that were like just jokes about mathematicians and chalk.
The lore that surrounds this brand runs deep.
이게 뭐 거의 뭐 70도 가능하다라고 이렇게 얘기를 하는데 뭐 일부러 먹을 필요는 없지만 70까지도 가능하고.
But the real secret to making Hagoromo chalk distinctly smooth, pigmented, easy to erase, nearly dustless, and therefore more expensive, is its special formula and production methods. It's these qualities that keep mathematicians reaching for the brand. Making a stick of Hagoromo chalk starts in one of these industrial mixers. The main ingredient is calcium carbonate, which is a compound often referred to as chalk. It makes up 70 to 80% of the recipe. Cheaper chalks will sometimes be made with gypsum, a mineral used in plaster, as the base.
굉장히 저렴하고 만들기도 단순하고, 그런데 그건 입자가 너무 가벼워가지고 쓰다 보면 공중에 날리는 현상이 좀 많이 있어요. 그래서
with other types of chalk, the piece of chalk will break, pieces will fly, but also a lot more dust is being created as you go along. This one, as I write, just like a couple of dust specks flew away, but otherwise everything stayed on the board.
그래서 안전하다라고 생각하고 이 탄산칼슘을 쓰게 되죠. 그래서 그 다음에 뭐 굴가루 이렇게 갈은 그런 회총 갈은 것도 좀 집어넣고 그렇게 하고 있습니다. 그러니까 아직 물기가 그 소금 정제된 기가 안 빠지면 열면 왜 그 바다 냄새 알잖아요. 그래서 넣으셨는데 오히려 더 이 분필이 단단해지는 그런 효과를 갖게 되셨죠. 예.
The last known ingredient is kaolin, a natural clay essential for making porcelain. Adding this helps bind the ingredients. The rest of the Hagoromo formula is confidential. All we know is its consistency.
탑 시크릿이라고 하나? 뭐 그런 부분은 좀 있습니다. 네.
액상이라고 보시면 됩니다. 액상 재료. 예, 그렇게 설명을 드리겠습니다. 네, 네, 네.
It's these materials that Shin Hyung-sok says differentiate Hagoromo from its competitors and bump up its price tag. At this point, white chalk is ready to be shaped into sticks. But there's an extra step for colourful chalk.
여기가 이제 배합된 거 핑크. 이제 이게 아까 이제 원재료 저기 똑같은 원재료에 알료만 핑크 알료만 넣고 이제 믹스한 거예요.
In South Korea, Hagoromo's white chalk costs 200 won per stick. Regular colours cost 400 won, and the fluorescent line costs 600 won.
그 카메라 하면 얘가 확 티가 나고 인체도가 좀 죽어서 나타나죠.
Typical fluorescent pigments contain harmful chemicals like formaldehyde, but Hagoromo uses premium pigments without those substances. Hagoromo has seen the demand for these colours grow as online lectures have become more popular over the last few years.
그 이 카메라의 색깔이 되게 잘 비춰져요. 일반 색깔보다도.
Alvaro needs a multitude of colours when he's teaching to visualise complex ideas.
So here I colored in the triangle in purple, so I'm going to do that also here, so you see the triangle that triangle in purple is the same one that we had before.
And just as importantly, he needs them to erase.
If you use other brands or cheaper brands like Cariola, if I wrote this on color, it would not come off, for like a week.
Colourful chalks with more abrasive formulas tend to leave deposits on the board that muddy the clarity of whatever he wants to teach next.
It was amazing the first time I tried with color chalk with Hagoromo. It erases just like the white chalk does.
Once they're mixed, white and colourful chalk are treated the same way. This batch will be left to dry out in a maturation room for about a day and a half before it's ready to be rolled and shaped.
숙성을 좀 해서 물기를 좀 빼고 이제 작업을 하는 게 훨씬 더 퀄리티가 좋은데, 뭐 찰흙 같은, 저희가 어렸을 때 갖고 놀던 찰흙 같은 느낌이에요.
Much of the equipment used in this process was specially developed or repurposed to make Hagoromo chalk, like the machine that kneads the dough before it can be molded into sticks.
그래서 롤링 프레스라고 이름이 지어진 그 산업기 우동 탄탄하게 만드는 건데,
Then, these freshly cut lumps are molded by a machine specially designed by Hagoromo's former president, Watanabe Takayasu.
뒷부분은, 저 뒷부분은 그 도자기 할 때 도자기 재료들 집어넣고 교반해서 이제 빼내는 그런 기계예요. 그래서 저건 뭐 다들 있는 건데, 그 앞부분을 이제 거기서 나올 때 이 앞부분을 이제 분필 모양을 만들기 위해서 이 부분을 설계를 하셔서 직접 만드신 거죠.
The machine forms thicker tubes than the average chalk manufacturer. Inside, the dough is compressed so the final texture is firm.
되게 압축해가지고 왜 떡 만들 때 우리 그 뭐라 그러죠? 떡볶이 떡이랑 가래떡 만들 때 그 기계랑 거의 비슷하거든요. 그래서
The extruded dough is then cut and left to air dry for up to a day.
이걸 바로 지금 가만히 두면 이게 물기가 지금 많이 좀 남아있는 상태라서 말랑말랑한 상태인데, 그 상태에 바로 열을 가하면 얘가 휘어져요. 이런 과정을 거쳐야지 좀 튼튼하고 단단하고 부드러운 분필이 나올 수 있는 거죠.
떡집 같은 데 보면 떡이 서로 붙지 말라고 물을 치르잖아요. 저 건조실에 들어가기 전에 서로 붙지 말라고 이걸 뿌려주는 거예요. 서로 붙지 말라고.
The sticks bake in the kiln at 70 to 80 degrees Celsius for about 8 hours.
이거 이제 꺼내서 흔들어 보면 소리가 도자기 부딪히는 소리 같은 게 납니다. 이렇게 짤랑짤랑짤랑 소리가 나면 이제 건조가 다 된 겁니다.
The average stick of chalk would be ready to package and ship at this point, but Hagoromo takes the extra step of branding and coating its chalk with another specially developed machine.
요즘엔 막 지나가면 뭐 이렇게 잉크젯으로 이렇게 막 쏘기도 하잖아요. 근데 저희 같은 경우는 이제 고무에 잉크를 묻혀서 하나하나 분필을 이제 찍으면서 밀어내는 형식으로.
The stamped sticks are then clamped and dipped in a special coating that keeps the dust off your fingers. When they're used side by side, the difference between coated and uncoated chalk is immediately noticeable.
Can you use some of that chalk on the board and show me why it's different?
If I must. It's a little rougher to handle. I'm already getting more dust just on my hands just from using that piece of chalk just for one equation.
Alvaro is an official Hagoromo social media ambassador.
I started making videos on TikTok, and because writing with Hagoromo chalk is sort of like a meme about mathematicians, I would make bits about chalk. And then at some point I was like, well, maybe I should contact them. And then they said, yes, you can be an ambassador.
It's a simple arrangement. He posts about the brand online.
And then they send me, from time to time, they send me a box of chalk. So I have a lot to go around, and that makes me happy. So
But a plentiful supply was not always guaranteed. When the original owner, Watanabe Takayasu, announced that he intended to shut down Hagoromo's only factory in Japan in 2015, Alvaro and his fellow mathematicians felt
devastated and just started to ration like what chalk I was going to use. Now I want to keep these for like research talks, and if I had to teach undergrads some calculus, then oh well, I'm gonna have to use the bad chalk for a while.
some people went as far as to buy lifetime supplies in anticipation of the closure.
I don't think anybody here went so crazy about it to get, like huge amount of boxes to last us through like the apocalypse. But you had your last supplies, and that was whatever you had that had to last you through, I don't know, like the end of your career, I guess. Emergency supplies of chalk in case, well, the factory was going to close.
And it nearly did. Takayasu was ill and having a difficult time finding a successor.
저는 계속 선생이었으니까, 그리고 서브잡으로 이거를 판매하니까.
But the course of that side job led him to form a relationship with Takayasu.
다른 사람이 만들어줄, 일본에서 분필을 만들어줄 곳을 찾으셨거든요. 그래서 찾은 데가 한 군데 있으셔서 거기를 저를 데리고 갔어요. 그래서 데리고 가서 이제 기계랑 공장 그걸 봤는데, 그쪽에서는 하고로모 지금 촬영하신 저 기계를 인수할 생각은 전혀 없고, 그냥 레시피랑 어떻게 섞고 어떻게 만드는지만 관심이 있으신 거예요.
Young-suk wasn't exactly looking to take over, but that visit got him thinking.
그리고 아침에 일어나서 이제 한국으로 떠나기 전에 사장님이랑 아침 식사를 하면서 제가 이런 말씀을 드렸어요. 그러니까 세상이 이렇게 바뀌다 보면 세상의 흐름에 따라서 어쩔 수 없이 없어지는 물건들이 있다. 그러니까 그렇지만 그 사라질 때 사라지더라도 제일 좋은 제품이 제일 마지막에 없어져야 된다고 저는 생각한다. 그래서 사장님께서 막 사모님이랑 막 옆에 따님들이 계신데 막 울고 막 그러셨어요. 막 그런.
Takayasu was moved by Young-suk's passion for the brand, but he originally discouraged Young-suk from taking over.
그 분필이라는 게 하향세인데 이거를 굳이 가지고 와서 판매했을 때 될까라는 생각을 가지고 뭐 반대하는 사람들도 많았었지만, 근데 제가 마치 숙명처럼 여겨졌어요.
So Young-suk bought the company and the machines.
엄청 고생을 했죠. 그래서 사장님께서는 그걸 아셔서 거의 기계들은 거저주다시피 하셨어요.
It took over 6 months and 16 shipping containers to get everything from Japan to South Korea. Eventually, staying true to Takayasu's formula and production methods paid off.
I can't tell the difference. I think it still feels great and much better than anything else that I've tried.
Chalk usage has been declining internationally for some time. But the unique challenge here is that Hagoromo can't keep up with demand.
많이 나가가지고 지금 많이 좀 소진된 상태고, 우리가 여러 나라를 상대한다 그러면은 지금 상대를 못해요. 생산량이 워낙 작기 때문에
It takes about 3 days to make a stick of Hagoromo chalk, and much of the process requires a human touch.
전 자동으로 이렇게 해가지고 대량 생산하면 아무래도 사용하는 사람들한테 더 많이 보급을 해줄 수 있고.
But any change is a risk when the brand's current success is thanks to honoring tradition.
이걸 쓰고 있는 전 세계에 진짜 애용하는 사람들이 이거가 끊어지지 않고 이 기술, 이 레시피 그대로 계속 생산돼서 계속 쓰여지게끔 만들어주고 싶은 마음이 사용자의 입장에서 이제 제조자로 바뀌었지만.
If the 2015 transition is any indication, as long as Young-suk can maintain the level of quality fans have come to expect, they will be grateful to get their hands on it.
I love that feeling. I love the feeling myself as I'm drawing things, and how neatly I can write things down, how precise I can do my lines, how I know that it's not going to, like as I draw that, it's not going to fade.
At Faber-Castell's factory in Stein, Germany, workers churn out a whopping 2.3 billion pencils a year. Making them takes a surprising amount of precision, starting with these, the pigments. Just like people, the particles of each pigment have their own distinct personality and behavior. Some are rough and edgy and scratch across the paper, while others are smooth and silky. But size also matters, down to the micrometer. Faber-Castell says ideally, 90% of the pigment particles should have a diameter of less than 40 micrometers. It says this is perfect for creating a core with a consistent texture and vibrant color that applies smoothly.
Wenn zu große Partikel da sind, dann führt es eben zu keinen gleichmäßigen Applikationsverhalten. Dann gibt es eben so andersartige Farbstriche in der Abgabe, im Laydown. Und das will man natürlich vermeiden.
Balancing the pigment's behavior requires adjusting the other ingredients. Unlike cheaper alternatives, professional colored pencils have a lot more pigment than filler, so it's important that the balance of ingredients is just right. The ingredients are top secret, but Gerhard Lugert, a chemist at Faber-Castell, told Business Insider it's a specific combination of oils, waxes, and fillers that binds the pigments. The result is this mixture, dough-like clumps of colour. But each colour has a bespoke formula, because not all pigments are created equal.
Wenn man eben eckige oder Pigmente hat, die etwas gröber sind, dann kann man gegensteuern, indem man da meinetwegen den Wachsanteil höher nimmt und das ein bisschen kompensiert.
After the mysterious blend of waxes, oils and fillers is mixed with the pigment, it's pushed through this high-pressure machine. The result? Identical pencil-length cylindrical cores. Workers bake the cores in batches to harden them. Then, they dip the dry cores in a melted mixture of waxes and fatty acid derivatives. Faber-Castell's coloured pencil cores are 3.8 millimeters in diameter, making them less likely to break compared to Crayola's 3.3 millimeter cores. The company randomly tests cores from each batch to make sure they won't break under pressure. Quality testers apply pressure to the cores at a 60-degree angle. They shouldn't break until the force is at least 3.3 kilograms. The core's performance is also scrutinized with smear tests like this one.
Wir schauen den Farbabstrich an und das heißt, wir vergleichen den Farbabstrich zur festgelegten Referenz, damit eben der Kunde über Jahre hinweg die gleichen Abstriche auf Papier bekommt.
Pencil cores made by different brands each have their own characteristics. The wax base of Caran d'Ache's Luminance pencils is soft, so the colour melts into the paper. That makes them great for creating gradients. Faber-Castell's coloured pencils, on the other hand, have a harder core, so they're best for fine lines and realistic details. Even the wood encasing the cores of professional-grade pencils is carefully considered. A pencil's wood determines how long the pencil will last and how well it will sharpen.
Zedernholz ist eben der Porsche unter den Hölzern, eben ein sehr hochwertiges Holz. Der Geruch des Holzes natürlich, die Färbung, die Spitzbarkeit. Wir haben keine Blaufolie, keine Astbildung. Also Zedernholz ist wirklich das, was die hochwertigen Stifte eben produziert werden.
At the factory, the cedar is cut into planks, which are stored for months until they're dry. Grooves are milled into the wood, and the cores are slotted into the planks. Another identical plank is glued on top, and they're pressed together before the next machine cuts them into perfect pencils. But the pencils shouldn't just perform well. They must also look and feel expensive. Workers mix dyes to the exact colour of the cores to create a water-based varnish for the outside of the pencils. Another machine coats each pencil with this varnish. The pencils are then stamped with the company's branding, and the end caps are dipped again, rounding out the top of the pencil. Every step of the way, the pencils are checked for visual defects like chips and varnish irregularities, and the faulty ones are removed.
My collection of pencils now is probably worth, I would say, about £600–700.
That's Bethany Veer, and she knows a thing or two about coloured pencils. She has about 400 high-end ones, which she uses to make realistic animal portraits that can sell for up to $6,500.
And each brand and each type of pencil works, and they complement each other so well. So I tend to use the Caran d'Ache Luminance because they're wax-based, so it creates a really lovely, smooth, buttery feel to the surface, and then over the top I can go in with polychromos. You can sharpen them to a fine point. They're super great for detail.
Bethany has big expectations for these pricey brands when it comes to blendability. Blendability in the world of coloured pencils means that the artist can layer colours over one another directly on the paper, creating gradients without sharp lines. The colours should transition smoothly. While some coloured pencil artists might use blending tools and solvents, Bethany prefers to create a blending effect through layering.
So layering and creating like the subtle changes, especially with an equestrian portrait, we think about the contours of a horse's face. There's no harsh lines. So the only way we can do that is by creating a lot of pigment on the paper, and we do that through layering.
She says she can't accomplish the same look with cheaper coloured pencils.
These are Crayola coloured pencils, which I think we used to have at school. And obviously I think you can pick these up from most supermarkets or sort of local stationery stores.
She's demonstrating the difference with swatches. First up, Crayola.
The one thing I'm really aware of is they're very kind of chalky, and quickly realising whilst doing this is that I'm having to use a lot of pressure and a lot of layers to really make this a little bit, well, more blendable.
Too many layers can create what's called a wax bloom, which Bethany doesn't want.
Eventually, when you press quite hard, you're not really going to be able to layer that much more pencil over the top, and already it feels a little bit slippery underhand because I'm adding quite a lot of layers.
Slippery, waxy layers limit how much gradation Bethany can achieve. With expensive pencils, she doesn't have that problem.
And then even despite the fact that I'm doing this, I can still go over with more layers. And if I was to take a little bit black, whereas on here you can see how scratchy that is. If I use the same light pressure, it just blends so beautifully into whatever we've put down underneath.
Bethany's work on animal portraits often requires her to blend several shades of the same hue, like varying browns in horsehair or dog fur. Compared to cheaper brands, manufacturers of professional-grade coloured pencils offer a much wider variety of shades.
When we've got such vast colour choices, it does make it easier to really flip between colours, and you get a lot of sort of subtle, different hues. Whereas a lot of the cheaper pencils, you only get your very bog standard colours. You might get a couple of different shades of a red, but they're all very vibrant. You don't get the neutral colours that you do with these pencils.
But for artists and their clients, all this effort from pencil producers is pointless if their work doesn't stand the test of time.
I need to, especially when we're looking at selling our work and selling it to the public, and actually charging for the work, we need to be ensuring that that work is going to last for years to come, and it's not going to discolour, it's not going to fade, it's going to stay as vibrant as the day when we drew it or the day that we completed that portrait. See, it's super colourful, and I really aimed, like, I wanted to show you this piece because of all the blending that went into it, but you can still see about 5 years on how vibrant the colours are. So obviously using the professional grade pencils, that even if this was in direct sunlight all the time, it wouldn't fade at all. It's like your portrait.
The longevity of a colour is known as its light fastness. Faber-Castell uses a star rating, where 3 stars means the colour will be preserved with little or no fading for 100 years in museum-like conditions. Almost all of the coloured pencils the company offers in its professional lines are 3 stars. Each colour receives a rating through a specialised light fastness test.
Hier sehen wir jetzt ein CPS-Sun-Testgerät mit einer Xenonbogenlampe. Darin werden eben die Aufstriche der Künstlerfarben teilweise belichtet, teilweise nicht belichtet. Man kann dadurch dann das Verblassen visualisieren. Gesamtbelichtungsdauer 100 Stunden für diesen Test. Und was man hier sieht, das ist eben dann so ein Lichtechtheitstest, wo eben Farben aufgetragen wurden, die dann einer Belichtung ausgesetzt wurden teilweise. Man sieht eben bei einzelnen Farben, die weniger lichtecht sind, dass die Farbe blasser wird, sich auch verändert. Und auf der anderen Seite gibt es natürlich auch hochlichtechte Farben, die man hier sieht, die sich praktisch wenig bis gar nicht verändern.
Faber-Castell says perfecting texture, durability and light fastness for its polychromos line costs 5 times more than producing its student-grade pencils. All this R&D translates to a higher price tag, but according to Faber-Castell, the extra effort is worth it.
Wenn Sie jetzt dann natürlich einen hochwertigen Stift nehmen, dann wird die Sonne sehr schön gelb, die Wiese wird grün, der Himmel wird blau. Das heißt, der Anwender hat ein Erfolgserlebnis, was sich ganz schnell einstellt.
Bethany appreciates this attention to detail because it allows her to create the realistic portraits she's built a business on. That's why she'll never go back to cheaper alternatives.
Like, if you were to just do what I did and bought a couple of pencils at the start, then obviously I think that can keep the cost down. However, as my collection has grown and as I've got more confident with the medium, obviously that's naturally led for me to expand the collection, which is now, as I said, worth a fair few hundred. And to me and the work I create now, I couldn't be without the entirety of my collection.
Marble has been used for centuries by artists and designers. But Calacatta marble isn't just any kind of marble. A square foot of some Calacatta can cost over $400, more than 4 times the price of high-end Carrara marble, which is mined in the same mountains. Its warm, ivory white background and thick gold or gray veins sets Calacatta apart from other marbles. But the key to Calacatta's price is its rarity. It's found only in the Apuan Mountains of Carrara, Italy. Marble has been mined here for over 2,000 years. Extracting Calacatta marble from the mountains requires decades of experience. Enrico has been a miner for 40 years. He learned from his father, who worked at the same quarry.
Ci vuole l'esperienza, ci vuole la visione della cava, i difetti, i fronti di cava, stare a vedere.
It's important that miners have a trained eye and are precise. They need to work around the mountain's defects to avoid the risk of the marble breaking. These flaws affect where the miners can extract, how much they can extract, and eventually, how much they can sell.
Per il taglio del blocco, per tirar fuori il blocco si cerca dei segni nel monte, nella bancata, nel fronte, o un difetto, o un tipo di macchia, o sempre un finimento, sono tutte cose che fanno parte della cava.
Despite Enrico's care and attention, he doesn't always get the result he wants.
Come abbiamo visto prima, che magari quando si ribalta si stacca un difetto che magari si prevedeva, però ci può essere anche di dietro che non lo vedevi. Quindi quando si ribalta la bancata, la criticità può essere quello lì.
But before they can detach the block, they have to drill and saw. In the first stage of extraction, miners use drills to make strategic holes in the mountain. They then run diamond braid cords through these holes, cutting the marble into a block. The machinery is kept wet to protect the marble as chainsaws help detach the block from the mountain. An average block is 12 cubic meters and can weigh 36 metric tons. It's then carefully loaded into a truck, which brings it to a processing facility. Here, the Calacatta marble blocks are sliced into slabs. At this stage, processors can't afford to make a mistake and risk ruining the rare marble delivered to them. They mount over 100 very thin blades onto a wet saw, and the cutting begins. The saw cuts slabs as thin as 2 centimeters. Then they're prepared for shaping and polishing. The slabs are first sanded and pre-smoothed. Then they're prepared for resination, or the application of resin to fill any cracks or holes in the slab. It's also used to attach broken pieces, like the ones that cracked at the quarry.
Questa è in pratica il blocco quando è arrivato giù che ha il materiale, che noi resinandolo lo rendiamo utilizzabile.
And with marble as rare as Calacatta, one mistake can have a big impact on the quality and final price of the slab.
La fase più importante in pratica è tutta una fase importante. Se la prima fase non è stata eseguita correttamente, successivamente le varie fasi non vengono eseguite correttamente. Quindi dobbiamo iniziare da subito, dalla prima fase, a farla correttamente. Quindi la lastra deve essere omogenea, levigata su tutta la sua superficie, nella larghezza della lastra, anche sui vari 4 angoli.
After Sergio checks that the resin was applied evenly, he moves it under UV light to dry. These steps ensure that the slab has no flaws.
Dopo il materiale viene posato per pavimenti, rivestimenti che diventerebbero neri, quindi prenderebbero lo sporco e perderebbe poi il valore la lastra.
Then the Calacatta slab reaches its final stage. It's honed and polished until it almost sparkles, becoming, as Sergio says, shiny to the eye. It's now ready to be sent to the buyer. Calacatta is extracted and processed on a per-order basis. Producers consult the customer every step of the way. This way, the Calacatta is perfectly customized to the client's needs, because once it's fully processed, there's no going back. Even with these risks and high costs, customers still want Calacatta.
Our customers prefer Calacatta because it's a luxury, it's a high-end product, it's timeless, and it's classical. It fits very well with any kind of furniture.
White marbles like Calacatta are more desirable because they have fewer flaws than darker marbles, so they require less maintenance and repairs. Calacatta is in even higher demand than other white marbles like Carrara. The veins look crisper, less faded. There are generally fewer veins in Calacatta, making it easier to incorporate in exterior and interior design. And it has a softer contrast than other high-end marbles, like Statuario, which has a milky background, darker gray veining, and fewer changes in color.
This is a typical use of Calacatta. It is made in this case to make kitchen countertop, and you can see the typical Calacatta vein.
But certain Calacatta is even more expensive. Calacatta Gold, referring to the vein color, is especially hard to find. While standard Calacatta can cost over $10,000, a Calacatta Gold slab can reach more than $29,000. And while specific pricing is considered an industry secret, Memo says selling isn't an issue.
In the last 40 years, demand for Calacatta has actually increased. And even during times of crisis, people have had a big desire for this type of material.
But this growing demand isn't welcomed by everyone, especially Carrara locals. Sawing extraction techniques have led to slurry and waste being carried to nearby environments through runoff water. This has impacted local groundwater and the people who need it. And environmentalists warn the overexploitation of the mountains will only make things worse. But that hasn't shaken demand for Calacatta, or marble in general. The global marble market is estimated to grow to $68.5 billion by 2027. So Calacatta will likely remain one of the world's priciest natural resources.
Every morning at this workshop in Morocco, artisans settle in, surrounded by tiles. The craft is still manual. Each tile is touched by human hands.
الحرفة بالنسبة لي أنا هي فن، ما كنعتبرهاش أنا حرفة، لأنه ملي كتعمق في الأشكال ديالها وفي الألوان ديالها وتبحث فيها مزيان كتولي كفنان.
The beginning of that art is pigment making. From 5 pigments, Abdurrafia can produce hundreds of colors, and it's his favorite part of the process.
ما الديزاين تقدر دير أي ديزاين، ولكن خصك غير تحط عليه الألوان اللي كيناسبوه. كل لون يعطيك واحد 20 أو 30 لون. ملي كنخلطوهم كيعطيونا بزاف د الألوان، عدد الألوان.
He says the materials for some colors, like green and blue, are more expensive, so they increase the final price of a tile. Abdurrafia measures out each pigment and combines it with cement, marble powder, and water. Turning together a colorful glob of liquid cement. This mixture is what gives cement tiles their characteristic matte surface. A finished tile looks like one solid block, but it's actually layered. And artisans make each one upside down. The liquid cement goes first, filling in the gaps of this copper mold. More complicated designs, like those with lots of colors or really tight patterns, take longer to make, increasing the price per tile.
هذا ديزاين ضيق. شنو هو صعيب في الخدمة؟ هذا رقيق. هذا في الخدمة خصك كيطيح الثمن ديالو غالي شوية باش تصوبو.
When the design is simpler, artisans can produce twice as many tiles. They work quickly, but it takes a beginner a while to learn how to add the proper amount of cement. And the tool they use is surprisingly simple, just a funnel with a stick to control the flow. If too much or too little is added, or a design is poured incorrectly, the tile is rejected.
هذه ما عندهاش هذا البياس اللي هنا ما كايناش هنا هذه كتقيل.
Depending on the design, artisans produce 50 to 90 tiles a day, enough to fill about 2 to 3 kitchen backsplashes. That's a much lower volume than ceramic tiles, where hundreds are fired together in large kilns. Cement tiles are made one at a time.
إذا درتي مثلا غير صباغة أكثر من صباغة، مثلا درتي الزرق أكثر من الأبيض، راه كتخرج لك لاطراس ديال الجليجة أو لا الزواقة ديال الجليجة كتخرج لك عوجة.
Once a design is poured, tile makers bury their art in a layer of sand and cement. While these experienced artisans don't often make a mistake, the manual nature of each step means that there's always the possibility of ruining a tile.
يعني باش تستمر في هذه الحرفة هذه هي الصعوبة اللي كتلاقى أنا بالنسبة لي أنا كصنايعي فيها. باش تستمر فيها وتبقى فيها وتعطي فيها وتبدع فيها، هذا هو اللي صعيب فيها. ملي كتكون صغير كتحفظ الصناعة بجميع المكونات ديالها، كتحفظها وتشربها. ابار ملي كتدخل كبير تقدر شي حوايج تعرفهم شي حوايج ما تعرفهمش، بزاف د الحوايج يعني غادي يكونوا مثلا فاتوك وانت عاد كتجي.
Once the parfait of cement is full and level, it's time to press. It's a crucial step that only takes a second.
يعني من تماك هذيك البريسه هي واش كتلاقي لك السيمه مع الرمله مع الصباغه وشي كيدخل في شي البريسه كتولي بحال الشكل الحديد.
The design is absorbed into the tile, so it won't rub off or wear like a painted pattern. Healing up a tile looks easy, but right now it's soft and moist, like a cake. Poor handling or outright dropping would ruin it.
أول حاجة كتبدا في الصنعة كتبدا بجليجة يابسة وكدير ديك الحركة هذيك وتعلمها ومن تما عاد كتمشي للجليجة عاد تصوبت خضراء مثلا فتية حيت واحد عاد بدا ويجي ويهزها هكاك راه غتفرتت حيت كتكون مازال خضراء لواحد الدرجة ما تصورش.
It will take several days of drying before Abdurrafia can sell his tiles. Some workshops cover cement tiles in water and dry them for up to a month. But Abdurrafia's method, which he says uses less water, requires just a few spritzes before the tiles dry in the sun for up to 4 days. From this workshop, one tile costs $1.50 to $3, or about $50 to $70 per square meter.
حيت ثمن الجليج في الاول اول ما دخلنا حنا الصنعه كان ثمن الجليج ما كانش بحال هكا كان طايح بالنسبه للثمن ديالو كان كيتجاوز واحد ال5 ديال الدراهم او لا ولكن مع الوقت كي قلت لك الجليج غادي وكيتطور والصناعيه مثلا ديالنا حنا بداو كينقارضوا اول ثاني حاجه والمواد ديال المواد باش كنخدموا بدات كترتفع حتى هي في الثمن هذا هو اللي جعل الثمن الجليج يطلع في الثمن.
That's because it's not just interior designers who want cement. The price is heavily tied to the volume of construction because it's used to make concrete. In the US, the producer price index for cement has more than tripled since 1990. Outside of recessions, the price of cement has typically gone up. Now supply chain disruptions and shortages are pressuring it even more. The COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine slowed cement production and distribution. When construction demand rebounded, many builders said there wasn't enough for the projects they had planned. And in 2023, some countries experienced a double-digit % increase in cement prices. Despite the cost of materials and competition from cheaper tiles, Abdurrafia says the craft is growing.
بالنسبة للطلب ديال الكاروت السيما بالنسبة للطلب كاين طلب وكاين بزاف ديال الحوايج اللي لا بالنسبة للجودة اللي كنخدموا حنا كتجعل الطلب يكون ولا بالنسبة للديزاينات اللي عندنا حنا بالنسبة للديزاينات عندنا جدادين حتى هما كيجعلوا نقول لك من دابا واحد 30 عام لهنا تقريبا ولا كتزاد الصناعه ولات كتطور والعدد كيتزاد الحرفيين هو العصر الذهبي اللي كان لانه في واحد الفتره كانت تقدر تنقارض كاع.
After the tiles harden, workers ship them to customers all around the world. Abdurrafia says his sales are about half domestic, half international, catering to the growing demand for handmade tiles, which have become an increasingly common sight on Instagram and in interior design. Google Trends shows a steady climb in interest in the topic since 2011, and the market size could nearly double by 2032, according to Data Horizon Research.
More and more, I think people are drawn to things that have character. Everything went through a stage where everything was just like white, and the interiors were very boring. There's an appreciation now for less synthetic, less mass-manufactured things, but I don't think it's a trend because cement tile is actually a traditional tile method. Architecturally, I think they're timeless.
Kate co-founded Concrete Collaborative in 2004. Many of its designs are created by artists it partners with, like this one from designer Caroline Z. Hurley.
I like kind of playing with different textures, patterns, colors to see what we can create. And a lot of people really love the designers or artists that we'll collaborate with. They almost feel like they're getting a piece of Alex Proba's art by using her tile.
Kate says cement tiles are great for creating a bold design statement in your home. Thousands of miles away, her customers appreciate cement tiles for the same reason as Abdurrafia.
أول حاجة فكرت فيها منين صوبت داري فكرت في الصناعة ديالي نديرها في داري هذه أول حاجة بالعكس ما جانيش غالي لأنه أنا واخا يكون بأي ثمن غنديرو بالعكس خصني نبقى انا خصني هذاك اللي كنخدم انا خصني نشوفه انا عندي في الدار كنفتخر به واكثر منه كنفتخر به يعني انا كنقول لك انا شي حاجه اللي عندي في قلبي بالنسبه لي انا الصنعه ديالي.
Every single piece is made by hand, so it has a natural variation. It's perfectly imperfect.
Because cement tiles are handmade and can develop a patina, some customers worry that installing or maintaining them is difficult. But Kate says it's actually similar to any tile installation.
I'm gonna do this sample just to have an idea. So the way we're gonna use is doing like this, just to cover the whole area. And this is how this works. So you see, when you push it up and you hit with the hammer, this glue is really good. You can wait like 2 hours and it's gonna be dry, ready to add the grout.
After deciding on the spacing, he spreads out a glue and presses each tile into place.
First of all, what we did, we just measured the space we need and prepare all tiles. In this case, we use this kind of spacer, which is 3/16. We have to make sure everything goes straight, has to be everything at the same spacer.
After cleaning off the grout, he waits for everything to dry, then seals the tiles once more.
Sometimes with synthetic finishes, it can make a space feel really cold. So the beauty of anything that has a little bit of life to it, that does patina over time, a lot of high-end clients really have an appreciation for that because they don't want their spaces to feel sterile. You know, something can last a really long time and have kind of like a life over time.
The fact that each tile isn't perfect is part of the charm. But it also means that the craft relies on the artisans who make each tile by hand. And not every workshop is as successful as Abdurafia's. Some artisans, like Syed Hussein in Egypt, worry they won't be able to pass on this tradition.
والله أنا بحس إن أنا راجل مميز يعني على مستوى مصر كلها دلوقتي ما بقاش فيه صناعية انقراض.
In the 1990s, competition from ceramic and marble tiles hurt his business. Now the raw materials are more expensive, and it's difficult to find workers. He's kept his workshop open by focusing on cheaper designs, but he's one of the few tile makers left in Egypt.
ممكن بإذن الله يعني الشغلانة دي تكمل معانا إن شاء الله يعني قول 100 سنة اللي الصناعية هتشتغل فيها وهتبقى إن شاء الله كويسة يعني.
Abdurrafia is hopeful that in Morocco, the craft will continue to not only survive, but thrive.
هي اللي كتواجه هذا المهنة في المستقبل وهي خص الناس يدعموها لأنها صنعة ماشي زعما نقولوا صنعة وصافي ودايزة لأن خص الناس يدعموها بالأفكار يدعموها يوقفوا كما كنقولوا بزاف د الحوايج خصهم يوقفوا معاها باش تزدهر وتزيد كما كانش مثلا نعطيك غير مثال بعض الناس اللي كيغيروا على هذه الصنعه هذه واللي كيعطيو من جهدهم من المال ديالهم باش هذه الصنعه تبقى كانت تقدر تنقرض ومنهم الناس اللي عطاو من جهدهم ومن مالهم هاد الناس هادو اللي كنخدم معاهم يعني ماشي هو كنحسبوش عمل وانما كنحسبوه هوايه حب ديال الصنعه ديال اللي عندي في قلبي وكما قلت لك ماشي مثلا انا عندي هاد الصنعه هذه كناخذ منها مثلا القوت ديالي او مصروفي وانما هوايه كنبغيها كنحبها.
Originally created on the request of Queen Victoria, the Series 7 brush was first made in 1866. and was designed to be the finest possible brush for watercolour painting. Since then, the skill and craftsmanship that goes into making each one of these brushes has remained exactly the same. To achieve this, the company needed skilled brush makers, and so, in 1946, set up a new factory in Lowestoft, England, a fishing town with a history of rope making. This factory now makes over 25 million brushes a year. The intricate work and dexterity required means that these brushes are almost exclusively made by women. It takes 3 years to train, and there are only 9 brush makers in the world that can make these top-of-the-range Series 7 brushes.
I joined here when I was 16. I worked 18 years, and then I had 12 years off, and I've been back 11, so that's 28 years I've been working for the company. When you first start, you would probably only make a few. You've got to get, like anything, you've got a skill and you build on that, and you get to learn the skill and then you get to do the speed.
The components play a big part in the cost. Each brush head is made from Kalinsky sable, a Siberian weasel that's hair is said to cost 3 times the price of gold by weight. These weasels are hunted sustainably every spring under CITES guidelines across Siberia and Manchuria. Only guard hairs from the tail will do. Kalinsky hairs are chosen because every single strand has a surface of directional, interlocking scales, increasing the surface area and giving the hairs their strength. And while many other natural and synthetic hairs are used for brushes, nothing has quite matched the quality of sable. Once the hairs are cleaned and graded, it's time to start making the brush. The wool has to be removed with a comb, and the hairs are packaged up and carefully boiled and ironed. The brushes have to be made with hair at its natural length, and the skilled brush makers can effortlessly separate between 28 and 32mm length hairs just with their hands. This skill takes years of training and practice. The 9 brush makers each have 27 years of experience on average. Hairs that are blunt or twisted have to be discarded, and most importantly, as each natural hair comes to a point, every hair must be the correct way up. The removed upside-down hairs can be flipped and reused. Every single hair is checked over by hand. The smallest brush size hairs are just 7mm long, shorter than an average eyelash.
We can't afford to let standards drop in any way, shape or form. What I would say from that is what this factory has is hand skills. It has individual skills. It has skills that when I have new people come in here, they don't sometimes believe that this kind of work still happens. We show them what people do, they will turn around and say, I'll never be able to do that. But they will be able to do that if they understand that quality comes first.
When the hairs are all sorted, they're ready to go into the cannon. The bundle is tied together and gently twisted through. Individual hairs are added or taken away until it's an exact fit.
They need to have that fine point to work with, that basically it has that colour carrying capacity, that the brush won't split or do anything that it shouldn't do, basically. Through the hair that we use, through the skills of our makers and how they make them, we've done everything we possibly can to make sure that we have produced the best product we possibly can.
Then it's time to attach the handles. The factory uses birchwood handles imported from Italy. The brush is glued into place, and then the brush heads are crimped onto the handles. This crimping process bends the metal to shape and keeps the handle tightly attached to the brush. Once the paintbrush is assembled, it needs to be branded and tested. The size and logo of each brush is stamped in gold on the handle. Wet point testing assures that everything works exactly as expected, and there aren't any loose or crooked hairs. Each brush is then gummed, a process that gives the brush head its final shape and allows it to bounce back. The shape of the natural hairs gives the brush a wide belly and a fine point.
So the key to art brush making is the people, and that is the skill. We retain knowledge from generation to generation. So we have makers now that are working under an apprenticeship of a 49-year served brush maker who himself had an apprenticeship under another 49-year serving brush maker who was brought into the business under his father, who made brushes directly for Queen Victoria. And it's very key that we retain that knowledge throughout the business, generation to generation, and we are now bringing in the next generation to make sure that we uphold the very high quality standards that we base ourselves on.
Isabelle Rocher, a relative of Henri Rocher, and Margaret Zayer are the company's only 2 employees. They make new pastel sticks a lot like the old ones, starting with pigment and a binder, based on a secret formula that took Rocher and his son decades to develop.
People like Whistler, Redon, Degas, Sisley, who all had issues with the medium. They were having problems with the powder sticking to the paper. They were having mold on their works. So Henri Rocher brought all of his scientific skills to try and remedy and bring them the product that they were looking for.
So the base of this new color is cerulean blue, which is a very classic pigment.
This new color, Caribbean blue, will join more than 1,900 others the Maison offers. It's the biggest selection in the company's history, maybe even the biggest selection of pastels ever. So adding new colors to the mix takes a discerning eye and skilled hands. That's where Margaret comes in. She's the creative force behind the business.
If the sun's out and we don't feel like working, we don't work. Or if the sun's out and it inspires us to make a beautiful color, we do that.
After the initial color is set, Isabelle and Margaret divide it into 9 gradations, from dark to light, so artists can find the exact shade they need.
So I'm essentially aiming to go between those two. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Margaret, I started with 1.5 spoons of the dark. I think I'm going to be making masses already.
Throughout its centuries-long history, the Maison was renowned for its unmatched range of colors. This is especially important for pastel artists, who can't just mix 2 pastels together to make a new color before putting it to paper.
Can't blend pastel on a palette like a painter might. But if you really want to make a line of a color, you need to have a stick of that color.
That blending needs to happen at the very beginning of a pastel's life instead.
I'm actually not far from where I want to be, which is really magical. I'm going to mix it, I really mix it in before I compare. So I'm actually right now a bit darker than I want to be, so I'm going to add a bit of white.
If the paste is too stiff, you can't integrate the white and the color very easily, but by bringing it to a sort of cake batter consistency, they merge quite well.
When they're satisfied with the color, Isabelle scoops the mixture onto a terracotta roof tile to dry.
We use the tiles because that's how it was done in the past, but the advantage of the tiles is they're porous.
The tiles absorb a bunch of the moisture, creating less work for Margaret when she will put the mixture through their antique press. After the paste has adequately dried, Margaret wraps it in a cloth and uses an antique press to gradually squeeze the moisture from the paste.
This is a tool that was there when Isabelle took over the Maison. I would imagine it's been used for quite a long time.
Yeah, essentially a lot of what we're surrounded with are tools and drawers that date back 150 years. And it's as well, it gives us this sense of âme in French, I'm not sure how you say that in English, of spirit, a soul.
Margaret joined Isabelle at the Maison in 2010 after a visit to the shop. She sent a cold email inquiring about a summer job and ended up finding her calling.
I would have been happy just cleaning the shop, so I didn't expect an invitation to come to the house and make the pastels with her.
The way I see it is I allowed the business to survive, and today I'm giving Margaret a sort of structure within which she can really make the craft live.
And by the end of this, we'll probably end up with something more consistent with modeling clay cookie dough. This is one of those points in the process, though, where you might want to just sort of muscle it, but you actually have to be quite attentive. There's certain colors that lose water quite quickly that you can easily overpress. And it's always more complicated adding water back. Oh, that's better. Use it? Okay, I'm coming over with the paste.
Hand rolling each pastel allows them to add more pigment to the mix than if they used a machine.
We tolerate certain consistencies that machines can't tolerate. We end up with colors that are either more vibrant or deeper or more concentrated. To me, it's always been the phase of the making that I prefer. It's sort of the moment when you're actually forming them, so you're starting to see it happening and becoming a pastel. When you don't know how to roll them, you can end up with pancakes. The first pastels I made just didn't look like anything. They were all weird shapes and they were flat, they had holes in them.
The cutting with the large blade, I believe that was also the invention of Henri Gaucher to the traditional process, because I think in the past they used to cut the sticks once they were dry, which took forever. So it's cutting the ends in one fell swoop.
When Isabelle took over the company for her aging aunts in 2000, she held on to many of the tools and techniques that Rocher developed in his day.
And then we let them air dry, usually for about 3 weeks. Depends on the season, depends on the colors.
But there was also plenty about the languishing business that needed to change. When she took over, the Maison had next to no inventory and hardly any customers to sell it to.
My great-aunts were in their 80s when I took over, which means that for the last 20 years they hadn't made much. They were very secretive, so they hadn't tried to generate new customers. So essentially their customer base, as the artists had grown older and died, they hadn't been replaced.
So she spent her first 2 years regenerating supply.
I managed to reconstitute about 250 or 300 colors.
Before focusing on demand. The Maison serves what's known as a niche market. Imagine the market as a pie. While a mass market company like Crayola tries to carve the biggest slice by appealing to as many people as possible, businesses serving niche markets cut smaller, specialty slices that appeal to a specific type of customer. A huge reason for Rocher's success was how he collaborated with artists to create the colors they needed. And Isabel was determined to do the same.
The most difficult thing for me was that I had no art background at all. I had no artistic background either. I didn't draw, I didn't paint. So when I was talking to the artists, I felt I was talking a different language.
One of these artists is Claude Barré-Allard.
I've known her since the day I took over. I think that the first color I made was a bleu indigo, an indigo blue, that she'd been waiting for 2 years.
Did she tell you that she was creating colors for me?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. That makes me very proud, for sure. That means that they like what I can do with their colors, for sure. They serve me, I serve them. It's an exchange, as in life.
Claude picked up pastels later in her career, after spending most of it working with oil paints.
I bought the Pastel Rocher very slowly in the beginning, and I discovered that I sold much more with the Pastel Rocher because the work became much better, because the quality of pigments was wonderful.
Historically, pastels have taken a back seat to more popular mediums like oil paints.
You have waves of it being used extensively, and then it goes back into being a secondary medium that people only use, to do basic drawings and etc. We are aware that, it comes and goes, and at the moment we feel that a few artists are really picking up the technique and doing really serious things with it, not just preparatory drawings. I walked into this thinking there are just maybe a handful or maybe 10 artists in France that really need the pastels. If I can multiply that by the number of countries around the world, I should be able to make a living out of it.
Isabel inherited an archive of century-old pigment, some of which is still usable. Sometimes, Margaret can even reach into the company's past to make new pastel colors.
Oh, that's beauty. It's a really beautiful ochre, actually. Actually, I'm processing this in real time, that I really like this pigment. This is a genuine discovery. Well, I kind of want to see what kind of a pastel this makes. I imagine because it's an ochre, it will make an agreeable texture. I want to compare this to ochres that we already have in the range to see if I'd actually kind of... Do you mind if I go get a piece of paper and a bit of white?
Sure.
While much of the process remains the same as when Rocher ran things, what Isabel and Margaret really hold on to is how he thought about the business.
What really makes, our pastels what they are is his formulas and how they marry to the craftsmanship of the artisan that he met.
Avec les pastels Rocher, c'est une ascension, quoi. On progresse dans la pose de la couleur, et ça c'est essentiel parce que, dans mon travail, c'est essentiel.
I know that Margaret has in her head several other ranges that she wants to bring in, and on paper she already knows that one day we will go above 2,000. But essentially, as long as we keep having people coming to the shop asking for colors they don't have, we're going to be bringing in new things.
Oil paint has been used for hundreds of years. It's made from a drying oil like flaxseed and pigment, sometimes with fillers and thickeners added. When mixed and crushed, these ingredients bind and thicken to form a permanent paint. While the rise of oil paint is associated with the Renaissance, paintings using poppy seed oil have been dated as far back as 7th century Afghanistan. But there's one key reason this paint hasn't ever been cheap. Pigments cost a lot of money.
So in a good oil paint, you're going to be looking for high pigment loading and a good quality pigment in that high pigment loading. So it doesn't matter if you have loads of pigment if it's a bad quality pigment. You're looking for light fastness so it doesn't fade, and tests on light fastness that have been going on for generations, in fact, for some pigments. So you're not going to create a masterpiece and then 50 years down the line, it's completely washed out.
The highest quality oil paint can be up to 75% pigment. And throughout history, the most sought after pigments have been worth far more than their weight in gold. And that's because they take a lot of work to discover and to make. The favourite imperial colour in Roman times, Tyrian purple, was a bright pigment made from the glands of sea snails, and it could take 12,000 snails to make just 2 grams of the colour. Indian yellow was originally made from the urine of cows fed only on mango leaves, and in the 16th to 19th centuries, mummy brown was actually made with the ground up remains of Egyptian mummies. And while the colour was perfect for some flesh tones, we quickly ran out of mummies to use.
Pigments do dramatically change the cost, and in professional levels you'll have series. So you'll have probably series 1, well up to series 7. The higher the number, the more expensive it is. And that's due to the pigments, how difficult they are to obtain, where they come from, and also how in demand they are as a product in the real world.
Possibly the most valuable though was ultramarine, literally meaning beyond the sea, as it had to be mined in Afghanistan. It was made from lapis lazuli, which in its purest pigment form can still cost up to $30,000 per kilo. The gemstone was used to make the pigment until a synthetic version was created in 1826. And the vibrant blue was valued so highly in the Renaissance that it was generally reserved for painting the robes of the Virgin Mary. Synthetic versions of many of these pigments have now been created. And while this means many are cheaper, some can still be difficult to produce. Cobalt blue, for example, has to be made by heating its components to 1,200 degrees Celsius. And once you have these pigments, they're tricky to work with. Winsor & Newton has been making oil paints for almost 200 years, and its factory in France produces over 5 million litres of paint each year.
In fact, produce paint is like cooking. So we have mixing, so we are mixing components like pigments and other additives like oil. We have then milling, so it depends, we're using different type of machines. So we're using granite, ceramic or steel. Then we are testing, okay, so testing the viscosity, the grain and of course the color.
The whole process is so select, so for every single pigment you need to handle it in a particular way. So it will need a particular amount of oil with it, and that ratio changes for every pigment. And you're going to need to grind it to a particular fineness. And actually, even with the same pigment, the milling and the grinding will affect the colour you have. So if you overgrind, you might end up with something duller, or with another colour, if you grind it very fine, you might end up with a purple rather than a blue.
The research and testing for these colours can take months or even years to get right. Small samples of each colour are made in a lab to measure consistency and light fastness. Above all else, the quality of oil paint needs to be reliable, as professional artists need to guarantee that what they're working on now will last for hundreds of years. And despite comparatively new paints like acrylic, oil still remains an artist favourite.
We've still got works that are still beautiful and relevant from the 15th century. And it's durable, and it has this ability to layer, where you can scrape back, you can keep working, you can work on a piece for years and keep on redoing it, and it gives every piece this history. And you know, the materials themselves are expensive, they're reliable, they're gorgeous. I mean, they come out of the painting at you.
There's a good chance that you sit on porcelain every day. It's the most common material used to make toilets. The reason why is also why it's a popular choice for dishware. Compared to other ceramics, porcelain is more durable and non-porous, so it lasts a long time, and it's easy to clean. It has a distinct white color, and unlike opaque stoneware, some porcelain is translucent. The secret to these differences is in the clay. Clay used for porcelain contains a high percentage of kaolin. This is what makes porcelain white. Kaolin is found all over the world, but large, high-quality deposits are rare.
景徳鎮とかマリタとかその天草の石っていうのはその石自体で磁気化するんで白いんですよね石が。で他の配合糖土っていうのは焼くとちょっとネズミ色みたいになるんで釉薬で白くしてるんですね。
Porcelain is often referred to as China, which is where it was first created. But today, it's made all over the world. This is the Arita Porcelain Lab in Japan. Artisans young and old have made porcelain here for over 200 years. There are countless recipes for porcelain clay, but in addition to kaolin, they usually contain materials like quartz, feldspar, and ball clay. Each one changes the properties of the clay. Ball clay makes it more malleable, and feldspar helps it become glass-like when fired. The whitest, translucent clays need to be free from impurities, and generally cost more than other ceramic clays. But even for experienced potters, porcelain can be tricky to work with. In order to produce a large number of pieces, this workshop has an artisan for each specific step in the process. Even though 10 people work on each piece, producing new dishware can take over a month.
あまりこの成形をするときに力を入れすぎるとちょっと出来上がった時に薄くなってしまったりとか、逆にあんまりちょっと軽く当てすぎてもちょっとガタガタガタってなって汚くなったりとかしますね。形が出来上がっていくのは面白いですね。
Compared to other ceramics, many porcelain clays are challenging to mold by hand. It's also more prone to cracks when drying. To help with this, and to produce more uniform pieces, this workshop uses molds for complex shapes. Katsumi Yamashita has been working with porcelain for 60 years.
焼き物作りっていうのは勘が働かんと。例えば今接着してるけど、この硬さでいいのか悪いのか、乾燥度合いがどういう状態か。難しいから面白いんですよね。
One of those difficult steps is glazing. Glazing seals the clay, but it also adds color and patterns. And it's one of the reasons that ceramics can be so expensive. At this workshop, each design is delicately painted by hand.
今これやってるのはちょっと作家さんのものなんですけど、その作家さんと相談しながら作り、買いのから安いのなんかたくさん特に上絵とかはピンからキリまであるので、もう私が買おうと思って100g でくださいって言ったら何万もしますよって言われて買えなかったことがあるので、それはもう書いた時間イコール値段ですよね。なのでもう時間がかかればかかるほど値段もそれに合わせて高くなるので。
Another challenge in making porcelain is temperature. In order to achieve that glass-like surface, porcelain is fired at a higher temperature than most other ceramics, usually around 1300 degrees Celsius. At this workshop, pieces are fired 3 times, a lengthy but crucial process. The first firing is done without glaze, at 950 degrees for 2 days. Slow firing ensures that pieces don't break in the kiln. Once they've been fired, artisans apply what's called underglaze. The main firing at 1300 degrees takes 3 days. Loading this kiln is a daunting task, but it has to be done carefully, otherwise pieces could be destroyed inside. Thankfully, this firing was a success. Now, the final design starts to take shape.
焼き上がった商品に今度は上絵付けっていうのをしていきます。その後800度で焼き付けて完成すると。大きなお皿を一つ作るには大体成形から上絵までで1月半から2ヶ月ぐらいかかりますね。
The price of porcelain varies based on the size and complexity of the design. A simple rice bowl costs around $7, but the most expensive platter from this workshop costs a few $1,000s. This blue and white design is a traditional look for porcelain, but in order to maintain interest in this ancient craft, the Arita Porcelain Lab has tried to create more contemporary designs that fit into a modern home.
もともとの有田焼っていうのはその日本家屋の中で見ると非常に色彩が合ってるっていうようなものなんですね。だから私としては今住環境が非常にモダン化されてるんでデザイン自体はすごくいいデザインなんですけど色が合ってないんじゃないかと思いまして、だからやっぱりこれからまた100年200年続けていくには常にやっぱ新しい技法を生み出したりとか新しいことにやっぱチャレンジしていかないと続いていかないと思うんで。
Every morning, Constantino Drai checks on the molten glass that has been cooking overnight at 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. He's working on an order of blue glass with Orsoni's color master, Michele Giumana. They add powdered coloring to the molten glass and start mixing. They take out a small sample and wait for the color to reveal. Michele breaks the slab in small pieces and dips it in cold water. If the color is not exactly right, they toss the pieces back into the furnace and start over.
Sto imparando ancora lentamente, ma con la pratica soprattutto, e ce ne vuole tanta.
It's a long process of trial and error that can take 5 times to get right. When they eventually do, this 50-year-old machine flattens it into slabs less than half an inch thick. The glass then sits in a kiln for 6 hours to harden. Finally, it goes to Orsoni's legendary color library. There are almost no shades they haven't produced. The room holds more than 3,500 shades. This variety is what brought international attention to the business back in 1889. Workers still hand-cut every single tile. These machines are the exact replica of the ones used here over a century ago. Each worker makes around 10 pounds of tiles in 1 hour. This kind of colored glass mosaic is called smalty, and it dates back to the 3rd century BC. Antonella Galenda has mastered the ancient method, adjusting each tile to fit the design, like a puzzle.
Però è sempre una sfida le tecniche. Noi adesso abbiamo soprattutto degli strumenti che ci permettono di essere più perfetti, più perfezionati, però.
It takes her a week to finish an art piece this size. Bigger ones take months to complete. Orsoni also specializes in tiles covered in gold, and it starts with transparent glass. Michele rolls the molten glass back and forth on a metal table to mold it. An air compressor shapes the glass into a giant 40-inch bubble. He has to be careful. If it's too thin, it could shatter. Michele used to blow the bubble himself, but a machine saves him time. When he is happy with the size, he cuts it at the tip. He makes 70 glass bubbles in a single day.
Perciò un giorno intero di lavoro.
Next, the thin bubbles are cut into smaller square pieces. They end up with Rosella, who pairs them with the 24-karat gold sheets. Orsoni buys the gold from a family that makes it with ancient techniques. She passes every piece on top of the steam, which works as glue. Back in the furnace, the glass burns at a lower temperature, 1900 degrees Fahrenheit, to make it less liquid. Workers place the sheets on a spinning wheel and add the molten glass on top. And then a pressing machine flattens them.
E quindi ci vuole velocità.
They can make 2,200 of these in a single day. When the glass cools, it ends up with Manuela Bonicelli, who cuts the plates into small pieces. She dips the edge of a diamond-shaped cutter in petroleum jelly to help the blade glide smoothly. She can spend 8 hours breaking each gold leaf into 16 perfect squares. It may seem simple, but it can take a toll on the body.
Appunto dipende dalle braccia, dalle gambe, poi una posizione che devi appoggiarti proprio sopra i gomiti, sopra le ginocchia.
Manuela started working here when she was just 16 years old.
C'erano le signore più anziane di me, non è una scuola, ma c'erano appunto queste signore che mi insegnavano. E quando ti riesce un lavoro che le tessere vedi che sono quadrati belli, perfetti, allora mi commuove veramente, devo dire la verità.
Artisans have been making glass in Venice since the 5th century. And the mosaics industry flourished on the island until 1291, when all glass furnaces were ordered to move to the island of Murano. The government said it was to prevent risk of fire, but many historians believe it was to isolate secret glassmaking techniques. Angelo Orsoni was born in Murano in the mid-19th century and started working in the glass factories when he was 7. The celebrated mosaic artist Gian Domenico Facchina recognized his talent and offered him a job at his Venice workshop in 1877. A decade later, Orsoni inherited the business. His work received international attention in 1889 at the Exposition of Paris, when he presented a tile panel featuring hundreds of colors from his library. It was the same fair that celebrated the debut of the Eiffel Tower. But the glass industry in the Venetian islands has been shrinking for decades now. Giancarlo Signoretto runs a glass workshop 2 miles away in Murano. We met him in 2021 when he was mentoring his assistant Agnese, but he had struggled to find young apprentices for years.
Se oggi non abbiamo giovani dobbiamo ringraziare. Io sono del parere che insegnare e lasciare qualcosa è un valore aggiunto di un maestro.
His biggest challenge came that same year when gas prices rose significantly in Italy, making it unaffordable for many. That's because back then, Europe imported about 40% of its natural gas from Russia, which had been limiting the supply. Using less gas isn't really an option. These furnaces have to run 24/7.
Ma con un forno che noi non possiamo spegnerlo perché è sempre acceso.
If the temperature drops below 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, the crucibles inside will crack and break.
Praticamente cosa succede? Bisogna chiudere tutto il forno.
Rebuilding and reheating the furnace could take weeks and cost up to $22,000.
È un giocattolo che costa tanto e se non lo sai usare ti freghi tutti quanti i tuoi benefici, tutti quanti i tuoi quattrini che hai messo via.
Giancarlo managed to keep his furnace burning throughout the crisis. But some of his gas bills were 4 times higher than usual. He started traveling and selling his art in other towns in Italy and abroad. So far, the extra cash has been enough to pay the bills. But not all glassmakers have been lucky. We also visited one of the only women-owned workshops in Murano in 2021. Chiara Tarayo and Mariana Oliboni had just opened it, weeks before gas prices spiked.
Se le cose continuano così, di sicuro non si può andare avanti.
Chiara spent the inheritance from her mother's death to keep the doors open. Their gas bills were so high, they applied for reimbursement through a government relief program, but the funding never came. Gas prices eventually went down in 2023, but by then, rent was also spiking. The duo closed their workshop and started renting space in other furnaces to do their artwork. Chiara launched her own mobile studio and plans to travel across Italy to teach glassmaking.
Mi dà vita, mi fa rinascere ogni volta.
Orsoni's extensive list of prominent clients helped keep the furnace burning. Its glass mosaics adorn the royal clock tower in Saudi Arabia, 1/3 of which is gold. This portrait of the Emir of Dubai has 100 pounds of tiles. Artists spent months matching 80 different shades and colors only to get the skin tone right. In 2003, Orsoni was acquired by the Trend Group, a global producer of glass and gold mosaic. Since then, the company expanded its customer base, forging partnerships with renowned fashion names like Dolce & Gabbana. Together, they created earrings with micro-mosaic pieces. Orsoni also crafted a limited edition of 18 bottles for the Dominican Republic rum brand Brugal. But its biggest project yet is the People's Salvation Cathedral in Romania, with 4 million gold mosaic tiles decorating it so far. Finishing the project will take 3 more years. But even Orsoni has struggled to recruit younger artisans. Constantino is the only apprentice here learning to work with molten glass.
Trovo che sia molto importante, soprattutto caratteristica di Venezia.
Manuela is planning to retire in 4 years. And she's thinking about the future of the Venetian institution she's dedicated her life to.
E io mi auguro appunto che trovino delle persone, non dico come me perché non siamo tutti uguali, che ama come sto amando io il mio lavoro.
It all starts with castor oil. It's the base of the paint, and it's what gives the art its name. Rogan means oil in Farsi. Ghafour's cousin, Mohammed, heats the oil for 2 days until it becomes a honey-like texture. It's a dangerous process only a few can handle.
4-5 kg जो ऑयल होता है उसमें कभी भी फायर हो सकता है, तो ये बहुत डेंजर भी है और इस प्रोसेस के लिए हमारे सभी परिवार के लोग मास्टर नहीं है.
Once it's cooled, Ghafour's nephew Jabbar combines it with pigment to create the paint.
उसको पत्थर के ऊपर रगड़ के पानी से थोड़ा भिगो के ग्राइंड करके रोगन उसमें वो भी अंदाजे से मिलाया जाता है. ऐसा नहीं कि 100 ग्राम रोगन है 50 ग्राम, वो ऐसा नहीं, अंदाजे से वो कूटते हैं दूसरे पत्थर से, वो रंग और रोगन एक हो गया.
Then it's time to paint. Ghafour says it's the use of the hand that gives Rogan Art its unique quality.
अगर कटोरी से डायरेक्ट उस कलम को कलर से उठाया तो डायरेक्ट आप उसका तार नहीं बना सकते क्योंकि बहुत थिक रहता है. अभी उसको हाथ पे रख के इस कोने पे रख के हमको रगड़ना है.
Swirling the paint into his palm creates heat to thin it out. Then, Ghafour floats the thread of paint over the fabric using a metal rod. He runs his other hand underneath the cloth to guide the paint. He has an idea of the final design in his mind, but the painting process is completely freehand.
जो पूरा तार इसका परफेक्ट जो चल सकेगा, कितना खींचेगा, वो सब आर्टिस्ट के दिमाग में रहता है। ये सब गॉड गिफ्ट है, कुल मिला के गॉड गिफ्ट है। ये हर किसी की बस की बात नहीं है, न किसी मशीन का काम है इस चीज़ के लिए।
Before it dries, Ghafoor folds the cloth to print the design's mirror image. He can finish some pieces in 5 days, while more complex designs can take him up to 2 years.
इसमें जो बारीकी है, ये येलो कलर की, वो एक एक बिंदी से कलम की पॉइंट से रखी गई है, जिसके लिए बहुत समय जाता है और ये खास अपने आप में खास इसलिए माना जाता है।
Wall art pieces like this one can cost over $1,000. Ghafoor and his family normally sell their pieces to tourists, but the pandemic put a strain on their peak season.
और अभी तक तो ये बता सकते हैं कि पूरा लॉस में ही है, क्योंकि टूरिस्ट नहीं आए, तो ये बिजनेस टूरिस्ट के ऊपर जो डिपेंड है और तो कोई सोर्स है नहीं, तो क्या करना। अभी हम बैठे हैं, राह देखते हैं क्या होने वाला है, क्या होगा, क्या करना है।
The struggle feels familiar. The art is said to have come to India from Persia 400 years ago, and it was once popular on bedding and ceremonial clothing here in India. But with the rise of mass-produced textiles in the 80s, locals lost interest in these more expensive, handmade pieces. Many artisans couldn't compete with mass manufacturers and dropped their crafts to find other work. Ghafoor, too, made the hard decision to leave the family business and look for work in Mumbai.
पहले बताया कि 1980 के आसपास मैंने तय कर लिया था कि मैं इस कला में अपना जीवन बर्बाद नहीं करूँगा, और हमारा थोड़ा बहुत इस बात से थोड़ा ये भी हुआ परिवार के सामने, क्योंकि उस समय गांव का कोई लड़के को वहाँ तक मुंबई तक भेजना वगैरह तो वो बहुत बड़ी चीज़ लगती थी, मैं समझता हूँ।
But a sense of responsibility and a plea from his family brought him back.
और तू नहीं आया तो ये पीढ़ी बंद होगी, आगे नहीं चलेगी। और मुझे याद है उस समय मैंने उनसे ये वादा भी किया था कि अभी मैं पूरी लाइफ इसी कला के पीछे लगा दूंगा और दुनिया भर में कोशिश करूंगा कि दुनिया भर में इस कला का नाम हो। मैं ये भी बता सकता हूँ कि वो वादा अभी पूरा हो गया।
Since then, Ghafoor has brought Rogan Art to the international level. He's earned over 10 awards for his work, and India's Prime Minister gifted one of his pieces to President Barack Obama in 2014. And just as Ghafoor learned from his elders, now his nephew is determined to carry on the legacy.
हाँ, मतलब जैसे मैंने पहली बार ट्राई किया तो थोड़ा डिफ़िकल्ट लगा, फिर जब धीरे धीरे स्टेप बाय स्टेप हमको सीखने को मिला तो तभी जाके मतलब नहीं, ये एक बहुत बड़ी विरासत है हमारी फैमिली को और इसको हमें बचा के रखनी चाहिए।
He's committed to preserving Rogan art through education and social media.
वो ज़रूरी है, और इसलिए कि क्योंकि हमारे जैसे फैमिली मेम्बर लिमिटेड है 10 लोग, तो हम अभी ट्रेनिंग भी दे रहे हैं कि लोगों को थोड़ा नॉलेज मिले कि यार इतना रेयर है।
Before the pandemic, the Khatri family ran workshops. Since 2010, they've trained around 300 women, and 20 of them went on to work for the family. But when COVID-19 started to spread in March, business slowed, and Ghafoor couldn't afford to keep them employed. Still, the family stays relevant with new products like face masks, and they have big plans to expand the business.
तो हम ये भी चाहते हैं कि कोई 2-3 डिज़ाइनर हो ऐसे इंडिया से या बाहर से कहीं पे भी जो हमारी हेल्प करे डिज़ाइनिंग में, ताकि हम उसको और ज़्यादा एक्सप्लोर कर सकते हैं आउट ऑफ इंडिया।
Though sales might be slow until tourists can start visiting again, Ghafoor believes he knows what it takes to be successful.
इस कला के लिए तो पेशेंस ही पेशेंस चाहिए, लेकिन इस कला को सेल के लिए भी पेशेंस रखना पड़ता है।
Arif Ahmed is a direct descendant of artisans who decorated the Taj Mahal. His family is one of only a few left carrying on the marble inlay tradition in India.
बहुतों ने छोड़ दिया, ये मैं समझता हूँ कि 50% लोगों ने छोड़ दिया होगा।
And that number could be even higher. According to some estimates, the number of marble inlay artisans in Agra has declined by up to 70% over the last 2 decades. For Arif, this work is a source of pride, and its disappearance would be devastating. He started learning the art of Porcelain kari from his father when he was just about 10 years old.
पच्चीकारी का मेहनत का तो बहुत काम है, मगर क्या है कि लोगों को उस हिसाब से पैसे नहीं.
His father, Hafiz Ahmed Khan, was granted the esteemed title of Shilp Guru by the Indian government and has won national awards for his marble work.
उनसे बढ़िया कोई पॉपी फ्लावर बनाया नहीं आज तक.
Today, Arif is using many of the same tools, methods, and materials that his ancestors did. Starting with high-quality marble sourced from Makrana, a small city near Jaipur, Rajasthan. It's durable, water-resistant, and has few impurities. It's also high in calcium, which gives it its pure white color. Varun Bansai has been working with Arif for about 15 years. He learned the marble craft from his father and grandfather. This same kind of marble was used to build the walls of the Taj Mahal. Varun and his team quarry raw slabs of marble and cut them using circular saws to separate the clean, usable chunks. Water helps cool the blade and reduce dust while they work. They then mold and carve the marble into tabletops of various shapes and sizes for the artisans. Finally, they deliver the finished marble to showrooms and to artisans like Arif. Today, Arif's team is designing an elephant sculpture made from Makrana marble, a popular souvenir among tourists visiting the Taj Mahal. Designers first cover the marble in brightly colored water-based acrylic paint, so the patterns they draw stand out better against the white marble. They draw freehand designs directly onto the painted marble with a pencil. The designs can be quite complex, like this one with thousands of flower petals, leaves, and thin vines. The patterns are often inspired by the inlay on the Taj Mahal, which looms over the city of Agra. The Taj Mahal was built between 1631 and 1648 under Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. The marble was carried in using elephants from Jaipur. To decorate the walls, trained inlay workers were brought in from Persia. A debunked legend held that the Shah forced the artisans to have their hands cut off after they were finished, so they couldn't replicate the beauty of the Taj Mahal anywhere else. Even though no one really lost their hands, Arif says Shah Jahan made sure the secrets of the art were protected in other ways.
का मुराद ये था कि जिस बिल्डिंग में आपने जैसे ये काम करा है तो आप उन लोगों को इतना मुआवजा दिया कि आप ये काम दूसरी जगह उस पीरियड में नहीं करेंगे.
Many of the Persian artisans used their payment to put down roots in Agra, and thanks to their descendants, the city is still today a major producer of Porcelain kari. A Porcelain kari artist will eventually fill each of these outlined spaces with a small piece of precious or semi-precious stone, chosen based on its color and aesthetics. While the marble comes from India, the stones are sourced from all over the world, including from Japan, Germany, and Iran.
ये चारों सेमी प्रेशियस स्टोन है और ये रोज क्वार्ट्ज है अपना. ये अपने पास अगेट है. ये लेपिस है, लेपिस लाजोरी, और ये अपना मेलाकाइट है. कलर के ऊपर भी डिपेंड करता है. कलर अच्छा होगा तो जाहिर सी बात है कि उसका रेट भी ज़्यादा ही होगा.
Artisans buy these stones from local shops where they're widely available. The more stones used in the design, the more expensive the final piece will be.
I think it's near about 10,000 stone in this.
Arif estimates a table like this would cost about 40,000 rupees, or $480. It also has lights installed beneath it to illuminate the finished design. The size of the piece will also affect the price and increase the amount of time it takes to finish.
ये पीकॉक का डिज़ाइन का ये है, तो अब इसको बनाने में ये इसमें कोई वर्क में तकरीबन कोई 5 स्क्वायर फीट है. इसके अंदर कम से कम 15 दिन जाएंगे. मोज़ाइक वर्क है. बॉर्डर इसका MOP मदर ऑफ पर्ल का है. बाकी का अब इटालियन स्टोन है और आपका इंडियन स्टोन है कुछ. तो इसको इधर से टूटने के चांसेस है ट्रांसपोर्ट के अंदर. बड़ा पीस है.
The smaller, more detailed work Arif describes as intoxicating work because it requires more time and intense concentration to get right.
ये 32 पीस हैं इसके अंदर, 8 पीस ये, बाकी 20 पीस ये हैं, 4 पीस ये हैं.
It takes half a day just to make one of these flowers.
अक्सर टूटे आते हैं ज़्यादातर, बड़ी उससे मेहनत से मशक्क़त से उसको बचाना पड़ता है.
Arif says this work could damage his eyes from the strain if he does it for too many years. But choosing which stone goes where is one of his favorite stages of the creative process. When the designer is satisfied with their rough design, the artist traces it onto a sheet of translucent butter paper. They mark each tiny petal and leaf on the paper, like a massive and complex color by number, noting which stone will be placed where.
कम्युनिकेशन भी ज़रूरी है, तो बिना कलर कम्युनिकेशन के कोई चीज़ अच्छी नहीं लगेगी.
Then they retrace these shapes directly onto the flat precious stones, with red or blue carbon paper placed in between. Cutting out these shapes requires a rotating wheel with very sharp diamond-edged blades. Each blade lasts for only about 3 days. Depending on the hardness of the stone, they could wear out even faster.
जितने थोड़ा देना, करीब 2 mm का है, करीब 2-3 mm का, ये डायमंड है बस. ये खत्म हो जाएगा, यहाँ तक हो जाएगा खत्म, ब्लेड बेकार हो जाएगा.
Updated technology like this has sped up the inlay process quite a bit since the days of the Taj Mahal.
जो काम आज 15 मिनट में होता है, वो पूरे दिन के अंदर होता था.
But some artisans, like Shafiq Uddin, still choose to use the tools of their ancestors, like this hand-operated pulley, even though he owns a motorized blade as well.
ये हैंडीक्राफ्ट बोलते हैं, ये मशीन हैंडीक्राफ्ट नहीं है.
Work like this, however, comes with a lot of physical risks. The cutters use their bare hands and must get dangerously close to the blade to make sure they get an accurate shape. It can also cause a lot of wear and tear on their skin, even eroding their fingerprints permanently. They are always breathing in marble dust. And while shaping the stones, they often work with water, which can numb their fingers in the cold months, when temperatures in the area can drop to around 4 to 8 degrees Celsius.
ठंड में यहाँ कारीगर कम काम करता है, मतलब जो 10-12 घंटे काम कर ले, वो 6-7 घंटे काम कर पाता है, हिम्मत नहीं होती.
Once the stone is cut, another worker will fine-tune the shape and polish it for a smoother edge using an emery wheel. Each cut stone is then lightly glued into the marble. Then artisans scrape an outline around the border to make sure they all fit perfectly. The elephant is heated by the fire so the temporary glue will soften and the stones can be removed to complete the inlay. At this point, they use a variety of pointed metal tools to dig, cut, and scrape out a shallow recess in the marble several millimeters deep. To attach the stones to the marble, the Taj Mahal workers were said to have used a special glue consisting of sugarcane, beeswax, honey, lemon juice, marble dust, and lentils. This type of glue needed to be used right away and would expire quickly. Today, however, there are many synthetic alternatives that last longer and are easier to make. They mix an adhesive called araldite with zinc powder and acrylic paint to create a paste. This will harden while the marble is being prepared. When ready for use, they heat the hardened glue with a hot coal so it's malleable and fill the entire gap in the marble. The stones are pressed one by one into the glue in the originally designed inlay pattern. Once the glue dries, they then use different types of sandpaper and polish pads to bring out the shine and smooth the surface. As they work, the pink dye is wiped away, leaving only white marble and brightly colored stonework. Artisans typically sell pieces like this to showrooms or marketplaces, which then resell them to buyers, many of whom are tourists visiting the Taj Mahal.
ताजमहल के बिना हम ये काम कर नहीं सकते। ताजमहल देखने आता है फॉरेनर तो हमारे ये प्रोडक्ट लेके जाता है।
The COVID-19 pandemic brought tourism to a halt, which led to a downturn in the marble inlay business.
लॉकडाउन में हुआ जब कारीगर जब बेकार हो गए, शोरूम से सब कारोबार था, कुछ शोरूम वगैरह बंद हो गए, तो जब तक काम ही बंद था तो फिर वो किसी ना कुछ अलग ये काम वर्क छोड़ दिया।
Arif says he hopes the government will one day open its own showroom and buy directly from artisans to help boost their business. Meanwhile, workers put in a lot of time and effort for little profit. But it's not just a decline in tourism that's a threat to the future of the craft. The job is not as lucrative as it once was, so many young people are opting for other fields.
हमारे दादा के टाइम तक तो बहुत अच्छे पैसे मिलते थे क्योंकि हर चीज़ की सस्ता था। जैसे ही महंगाई बढ़ती चली गई, पैसे इंक्रीज़ नहीं हुए, कारीगरों को नहीं, और जो बना के उनको दे रहा है उनके भी पैसे इंक्रीज़ हुए। तो उससे कारीगरों ने आज की डेट के अंदर जो पहले के सीखे, वो कोई ये काम सीखना चाहता नहीं है, ना अपने औलाद को सिखाना नहीं चाहता, क्योंकि वो चाहता है पढ़ लिख के अपने औलाद को मैं इंजीनियर बनाऊँ या किसी भी उसमें लाऊँ।
These days, Arif's son enjoys watching him work, but Arif says he'd never force him to become a Parchin Kari artist. Others, like Mohammed, don't plan on passing the legacy down to their kids.
अब तो ये कि बहुत कम हो गया है काम ये, पहले ऐसी बात नहीं है, अब कोई सीख भी नहीं रहा है। मेरी दो बेटियां थी, दोनों की शादी हुई, मेरा बेटा भी पढ़ रहा है, पढ़ा रहा है, ये काम नहीं सिखाएंगे।
New workers are entering the trade, Arif says, but they are choosing simpler work that requires less training, like creating larger wall pieces or those with less stone.
ये तो हाथ से ही शेप देके जो बारीक काम है ना, ये इसी से ही बनता है।
And the production of small, highly detailed pieces, the intoxicating work that's been passed down from generation to generation, is in danger of being lost forever. But their creations will last for years, just as the Taj Mahal has withstood the test of time.
मगर वो कारीगर नहीं रहा होगा जो जिसे आर्ट पीस जो बना सके, जिसे आर्ट पीस कह सके। फिर सिर्फ वो कारीगर रहेगा कि भाई मुझे 2 पैसे कहाँ से ज़्यादा मिल रहे हैं और मैं कैसे कम करूँ।
Bidri art begins with metal casting. An artisan uses a finished piece to make the mold. He piles sand on top and packs it as tightly as possible with the help of his body weight. Now the mold is ready to cast a new piece. The worker melts pieces of zinc and copper over a small fire. Then he pours the molten metal into the mold. It takes about 5 minutes for the metal to cool and solidify. Then it's time to reveal the final shape.
जैसे माँ पेट में बच्चा है तो पैदा होने के बाद ही मालूम होता है वो लड़की है या लड़का है। तो जब हम मटेरियल जब पेटी के अंदर डालते हैं वो फेल हुआ या पास हुआ वो खोलने के बाद ही मालूम होता है।
Mohammed Ibrahim takes on buffing and polishing, using one of the only pieces of modern equipment in the workshop. Then he covers the piece with a copper sulfate solution. This creates a chalkboard-like surface for the artisans to sketch out a design. They begin to chisel away at the metal, following the sketch. It's the most time-consuming part of the process. Sometimes they spend an entire day chiseling. Next, the artisan hammers a silver or gold wire into the engraving. It's detailed work that takes patience and good eyesight. That's why this glasses salesman comes by the workshop every month.
नहीं लगाया तो आँख में मोतिया पर्दा व्हील भीतरी काम के लिए होना जरूरी है साहब क्योंकि वो बारीक काम है।
Meanwhile, another worker welds the pieces together to form a vase. Then it goes through a few rounds of buffing, filing, and cleaning. Finally, workers boil together water, soil, and aluminum chloride. They soak the piece in the hot mud to give it the signature black color. The wire resists the coloration, so the design stands out against the dark background. The soil used in this process is what makes Bidri art unique.
ये बहुत बड़ी बात है दुनिया में ये किसी भी मिट्टी से ये कलर काला ना होता सिवाय बिदर के खिले की मिट्टी से काला होता है.
It comes from a 600-year-old fort, which is just about 3 miles away from Mohammed Salimuddin's workshop. He says a chemical used in the fort's construction gives the soil a special quality.
वो प्रोसेस के चुनने से ही जो ज़मीन पे अफेक्ट होता है मैग्नेटिक अफेक्ट हो जाता है उसके अंदर की मिट्टी से ही ये कलर ब्लैक होता है. तो चोरी छुपी से हमारे कोई एक आधा बंदा जाके तो वो एक बार थैला ला लिए तो 8-10 साल इजीली चलता है.
Mohammed says Bidri artisans have never been stopped by security. But before taking the soil, he checks the quality.
इसलिए टेस्ट करते हैं कि थोड़ी सी खारापना होता है सर. Perfect.
The fort was built by the Bahamani dynasty. They're credited with bringing metalworkers from Iran and popularizing Bidriware between the 14th and 15th centuries. The art flourished through the 1800s, when it was showcased at exhibitions in Europe. But a fall in demand towards the end of the 20th century and the rising cost of silver in the 2000s put a strain on artists' livelihoods.
पहले 400 रुपये को 10 ग्राम सिल्वर मिलता था. अब 750-800 रुपये को 10 ग्राम हो गया.
The pandemic has also raised export costs and kept tourists from visiting Bidr, slashing Mohammed's sales.
2019 में जो सेल हुई थी उसकी 10% भी इस साल सेल नहीं हुई सर. 10% भी नहीं हुई सेल. अब पता नहीं कितने साल लगेंगे हालात सुधरने के लिए इंडस्ट्री के.
Today, Mohammed says there are around 10 workshops in Bidr, but he worries they won't be around for much longer.
अब धीरे धीरे ये क्राफ्ट भी घट रही है. न्यू जनरेशन उससे जुड़ रहा नहीं तो ये आर्टिजनों की तादाद दिन ब दिन गिरते जा रही है.
Mohammed has managed to stay in business by expanding his market with online sales. He sells pieces at his brick-and-mortar shop too, just a short walk from the artisans' workshops. A vase that takes up to 3 days to make goes for 3,000 rupees, or $41. Mohammed says he purposefully prices his goods to just about break even, to keep turnover high.
ज़्यादा अगर रेट रखे तो बिकने में देरी करता आइटम. काम चलने से मतलब बस उतनी मार्जिन रखते हैं.
The pieces that require more time and resources cost more, like this bust. It took 20 days to make, and it's selling for 60,000 rupees, or just over $800. And this plate that took nearly 2 months to make cost 200,000 rupees, or about $3,000. Hardships aside, Mohammed is happy, so long as the whole industry works together.
मैं अपने बिजनेस से सेटिस्फाई हूँ सर, लेकिन मैं चाहता हूँ कि मैं सेटिस्फाई मैं एक रहने से काम नहीं चलता. पूरी इंडस्ट्री को बिजनेस मिले. नहीं बिदरी क्राफ्ट में तो कोई कंपटीशन नहीं है सर हमारा, क्योंकि हम जो काम करते हैं पूरे इंडस्ट्री के लोग एक मिलजुल के काम आना चाहते हैं.
Dhokra art is more than a job for Rajendra, it's a passion. And his workshop has been a staple in the town of Kondagao for over 10 years. He starts each day by mixing rice husk with black soil to make the clay. This blend keeps the model from cracking.
तो वो ये ढोकरा का काम में कई बार उन्होंने हमारे प्रोजेक्ट बना के फिर उसको देखे होंगे, तब जाके वो मिट्टी लोगों का चयन किए. देखिए पूरा काम हाथ से होता है और धीरे धीरे होता है.
He leaves it to dry in the sun for 2 days. This layer of wet riverbed soil helps smooth out any bumps. Then it's time to prepare the wax. Rajendra uses beeswax because it's strong and allows him to create intricate designs. He melts and strains it into cold water. The linen cloth catches impurities like bee wings. The fire makes the wax more pliable and easier to shape into logs. Rajendra adds it to this pressing machine he inherited from his grandfather. The press stretches the wax into meter-long strings. This was once done completely by hand. Some other communities still use that method, but it takes a lot of time.
एक अगर धागा 1 मीटर का धागा निकालना है तो कम से कम 15 मिनट 20 मिनट लगेगा.
Rajendra prepares the model for the wax, smoothing the surface with a file and rubbing it with a bean leaf.
रेत को हटाने के लिए वो पॉलिश का इस्तेमाल करते हैं जो सेम का पत्ती है.
Slowly, he wraps the strings around the model to bring his ideas to life. The design he makes with the wax is printed on the wet soil underneath. He has to be careful not to leave gaps between the strings.
धीरे से धीरे करके तो वो धागा टूटना नहीं चाहिए और जुड़ना नहीं चाहिए.
Designing is Rajendra's favorite part of the process. It took him years to master, and precision is key here. He can spend a full day working on just one sculpture. He comes up with his designs on a whim and improvises as he goes.
अच्छा लगता है मतलब कि वो काम करूँ तो उसका उसको जो भाव उस मूर्ति के अंदर लाना पड़ता है. हाथ से परफेक्ट नहीं होगा. सब चीज़ का सब प्रकार थोड़ा ना थोड़ा सब जगह डिफरेंस होगा. ढोकरा का खासियत वही है.
Most Dhokra sculptures depict animals and deities from tribal folklore.
ये पहला स्टेप तैयार हो गया. ऐसा ये नंदी तैयार हो जाता है. जैसे नंदी का पहला स्टेप हो गया.
Nandi is a sacred bull in Hindu culture and one of Rajendra's most popular designs. Many believe it brings peace and prosperity into the home. Rajendra has made hundreds of these sculptures over the years. He covers the model in another layer of soil. This method of creating 2 layers on both sides of the wax is called hollow casting. Rajendra makes 2 holes at the base that will allow the wax to melt and make way for the molten metal. He covers the model in another layer of termite soil and creates a funnel around the wax strip.
उस पाइप में पिघली हुई पीतल इसमें डाल देंगे तो जैसा जैसा मोम का अंदर बना हुआ है वैसा वैसा पीतल का रूप ले लेगा.
Rajendra starts a fire in this brick furnace and uses wood from a forest nearby. He monitors the temperature throughout, keeping it at around 1300 degrees. The model sits in the fire for 2 hours until all of the wax melts away. If it's too hot, the model will crack and spoil.
वो लाल होते जाएगा. पूरी लाल ईंट के सरीख लाल दिखेगा और मेटल पूरा मेल्ट हो जाएगा. तो हम लोगों को पता लग जाता है कि पक गया.
Rajendra removes it from the furnace with a metal rod.
तो हाथ बैठ जाता है. जब वो मॉडल को अपन लोहे के संसी से जब पकड़ते हैं तो वो अंडा की सरीख वो रहता है. लेकिन अपने को संसी कहाँ पकड़ना है किस जगह में तो वो पूरा काम मैनेजमेंट होता है.
He melts pieces of scrap metal, including utensils and old machine parts. Then he pours the molten mix into the channel and waits for it to cool down. Dhokra art gets its name from the Dhokra Damar, the nomadic tribe that popularized the craft across the country. Legend has it, the tribe went from village to village selling the metal figurines of Hindu gods and goddesses in exchange for food. The art form continued to thrive into the 2000s. But that all changed in 2016, when India demonetized much of its currency in an effort to weed out illegal money and counterfeit bills. Overnight, almost 90% of the cash in circulation was made worthless. Many customers stopped buying Dhokra art to save money. It took the Indian government 8 months to replace the bills in remote areas of Chhattisgarh. By the time it did, many Dhokra artists who depended on cash sales had to quit the craft to make a living.
भाई हमारे पास बजट नहीं है, पैसा है ही नहीं, मार्केट में पैसा है ही नहीं, ऐसा करके।
While Dhokra is still popular, many artisans are still struggling. So Rajendra recognizes the importance of his work every time he breaks a mold and reveals his newest creations.
ये सही सलामत बनेगा क्योंकि जैसे माँ का कोख में बच्चा रहता है वैसी है कि जब तक बाहर नहीं निकलेगा तब तक हमको मालूम नहीं रहता है कि पूरा बन गया कि खराब हो गया।
The rising cost of raw materials is forcing them to sell their sculptures at higher prices. The number of artisans working in the trade has dropped by nearly a third in the last 3 decades.
कि अब ये काम नहीं चलेगा, कौन खरीदेगा, ये तो कोई खाने पीने का चीज़ नहीं है, एक बार बन गया तो 100 साल तक चल रहा है, तो कहाँ से चलेगा, ऐसा भी कई हमारे शिल्पियों का मन में आता है भावना, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं है।
But it's not just about the money for Rajendra. His uncle Jaidev Baghel was recognized as a master Dhokra craftsman by the Indian government and even earned a statue in Kondegao for his work.
वो सारे काम को वो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मार्केट तक पहुंचा चुके हैं।
Now Rajendra is continuing his legacy. He's trained over 200 people and helps them sell their work. Despite the hardships, he's managed to keep his business afloat. He sells mainly in government-funded showrooms and makes around 40,000 rupees or $500 a month. He's shown his work in exhibits across India and has won 2 national awards.
तो इस काम को पकड़ के किया, तो वो मैं उस राष्ट्रपति के साथ खाना खाया, प्रधानमंत्री के साथ खाना खाया, बैठा, घूमा, देश दुनिया में गया, तो जो चीज़ मेरे को मिला, तो वो चीज़ मेरे प्रोजेक्ट का देन है।
But that's not the reality for most small-scale artisans who make around 7,000 rupees a month, less than half the monthly average for most workers. And many Dhokra-making families are encouraging their kids to work different jobs.
इसमें लोग अभी भी हारने की कोशिश में हैं, लोग डर रहे हैं।
Rajendra believes his traditions molded him, and he wants to do the same for future generations.
अभी तो हम लोग एक चिट्ठी भर जगह में तक हमारा सामान नहीं पहुंचेगा, हम तो एक छोटे से गांव में 100 लोग हैं। मेरे ढोकरा का आर्ट तो एक तो मेरा खानदानी काम है, मेरे लिए तो बहुत गर्व का बात है। फिर मैं पढ़ा लिखा नहीं हूँ, तो मेरे लाइफ के लिए तो बहुत बड़ा महत्व है कि मैं ढोकरा आर्ट ही करता रहूँगा और करता ही चला रहूँगा, आगे बढ़ाऊँगा इसको।